what percentage of technicians, so I'm just gonna, he did not ask me to do this, but Hyrum is a very special technician. He's been able to fix things that, I could never imagine could be fixed, and certainly what a lot of other technicians may not even know about. Of course, you're always learning new skills at this job. It's like being a pianist. But how many technicians would you trust to know how to prep a Steinway? And how many years of experience does it take to get to the level that you feel comfortable prepping a Steinway?
Well, how many technicians would I trust? That's a hard one, right? And maybe that's eco, I don't know. But in our region, the Mountain West here, I know of 2 or 3 maybe that I think, wow, I really admire their work and I might learn something there, and
Sure.
and it'd be a fun conversation to have between them. So that gives you an idea here. And then, what was your other question?
How many years did it take until you were comfortable doing this? Because I know you're always getting better at what you do, but how long did it take you to feel comfortable either prepping a piano period from the time you started being a tuner and then a technician or whatever? Can you take us through that as you ease these?
Sure. I mean, if someone had the ideal situation of good information and teaching and, tutoring, I would think they could be working on, and they have aptitude for it, I think they could be working in a concert level, within 5 years and do a pretty good job of it.
Okay.
Very few people get that opportunity. That's the hard thing.
Sure. Finding someone to apprentice under.
Yeah, and there are degree programs and things like that, here and there, but I haven't found that necessarily accelerates things much. Just from people I've talked to, and that maybe not the case for everybody.
So it's mostly being in the field, being in the shop with someone overseeing your work.
Yeah, and how good of a self-learner are you?
Sure.
And you just have to be like a sponge. So for me, I learned at the university when I was still a student, took a couple years there. By the end of those couple years, I felt comfortable, charging for my services, going out doing in-home calls. Then I worked for the Yamaha dealer for a number of years. That was really good to get a lot of foundational skills. I worked with a lot of pianos that had issues, and that was really good.
Yeah, I'm sure. Were you calling your master? What do you call someone who oversees? You're the apprentice. What do you call the other person?
I guess a mentor.
Would you call your mentor a couple times a day, like, "Hey, how do you fix this?"
All the time, yeah. It's a small community, and we enjoy, probably a lot like pianists, we enjoy comparing notes.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something that you're not familiar with. When you work for a dealer, you're going to be working on the same kind of piano over and over. You get the right tool set, it goes pretty smooth, but if you're not working on a certain piano a lot, there might be something that you need to consult with someone who does.
Do you have any horror stories of like the worst piano you ever had to work on that comes to mind quickly? I know there's probably many.
I think it's just usually when the expectation of the customer doesn't match up with what's possible with the parts in the piano that's there, usually with a really old upright or something like that.
Yeah.
So usually the horror stories are just those days when you're breaking things for whatever reason. You have to just slow down and say, all right, what am I doing here? And just be patient. It takes a lot of patience. So yeah, I'm easing through these balance holes. Like this one, you can see it stays up. I just lift it a little bit and it stays. So when I ease that, that'll free that up. And they may not all come tight. Some pianos might come and they just feel great. And I can go the other way if you have a piano that the hole's too loose on,
Sure.
But it's easier just to hit it right from this direction, just easing it just a little bit.
Sure. What if someone has a piano? We've talked a little bit about my piano. If we had to go back and redo that again, would you put in those spring-assisted whippings to make a heavy piano lighter? Because I know most people don't complain that their piano's too light. I know there have been cases that I've heard, but most people are saying, my piano's too heavy. Kind of take us through a checklist of things that you'd check before you'd start messing with the geometry, and then what things you would do. Would you put in those spring-assisted whippings? Another technician put those into our piano, and then he readjusted the geometry to feel a lot better. Kind of take us through that, because I know a lot of people complain, oh, my piano is too heavy.
Yeah, a lot of people will say, can you lighten my piano? As if it was just a screw I could turn, and do it. Unfortunately, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But most often, the problem, if someone has a heavy piano, I'm thinking like a Korean-made piano a lot of times, you'll get issues, with like ceramic pianos or other things, or even a Yamaha or something. Most often, the problem is friction. So that's what you look for first, excess friction.
Uh-huh.
Someone once said, ask any engineer, friction is not a good thing. It wears things down and so forth. And sometimes it's as simple as just lubricating these key pins, which takes 5 minutes. Just lubricating the key pins can make it feel like a different piano sometimes.
Yeah.
Regulation, how far is that hammer traveling versus how far is the key traveling? That's essentially regulation in a nutshell. It's just those two parameters.
So if you moved the hammer closer to the string, that's going to essentially be a lot less work for the key. Would that make it feel lighter?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think for most people they'd say, yeah, it feels lighter.
Okay.
Or quicker or something like that. But, you give up something also, right? It has to move a certain distance, or things don't time out right in the stroke of the key, or you also get where you don't have as much power.
Right. That was one interesting thing that we did on my piano is we adjusted the key dip a little bit higher to match the other piano. And correct me if I'm wrong, due to that, we also had to raise the level of the hammers to adjust the key dip?
Yeah, so we made the key dip, so the key travel, or how far it goes down, we minimized it a little bit.
Okay.
And we just set it to match your other piano, because that's what the feel you're used to.
Yeah.
That key dip is huge for a pianist. We can sense, like about probably 20 thousandths of an inch different. When you're really adjusting it, you can say, wow, that feels a lot better. That feels a lot more consistent. Just like you can, and you know what? It also affects the tonal output for some reason.
Interesting.
But I'm getting lost from your original question. Let's see, we were
just talking about, because we brought the key dip, we minimized the key dip. Did that affect the hammer height?
Yeah, so we made it so the key doesn't travel as far. So if we had left the hammers traveling the distance they were, they wouldn't quite make to the strings, right? So it changes the feel of it. So you have to then change that starting point of the hammer so it doesn't have to travel as far.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that depends also. He was saying, you don't need that huge key dip in this room with the hammer traveling further for more power, because I'm just in a small little studio room. So it worked out great there, but maybe if we got into a big concert hall, that would be a detriment.
Maybe, but I think the thing that Steinway teaches back at the factory when they do their trainings and things like that is that they have a spec and they want to really preserve that so that artists, because you're going to find Steinways in concert halls, right, for the most part. So they want to preserve the spec so that you can go from venue to venue and be comfortable with what's going on there.
Right. Yeah.
So that one's, usually a spec that doesn't vary a whole lot. But
Yeah, I remember. Is it up to the B that has a certain key dip and then the D goes slightly lower, or is it graded throughout all the different sizes of Steinway?
all their grands have the same key dip spec of 400 thousandths of an inch.
Okay. When you say grand, are you talking even an S?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think of a grand as just a piano that's
Yeah. Oh, of
horizontal.
course. I was just.
And,
Some
yeah.
people specify concert grand. And
Right. I just
baby.
laugh because people always split hairs over that. Is it a baby grand or a parlor grand? And I don't know why, but I just don't. I don't think of it that way. But yeah, because the action's the same. It's just they're longer or shorter. But
Sure.
yeah. So what was I talking about?
I
I'm
must
doing
have-
three things at once.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about, is it a standard key dip on every
Yeah.
piano?
Oh, so it is. Yeah. So it's that 400 thousandths. But there's something missing from that spec, which is you've got this squishy little felt. If you see on this side, you got this squishy little felt punching right here.
Right.
And I push harder or softer. I change that by considerably, a good distance, relatively like a millimeter or so, and that's a big deal in key dip. So what's missing from that spec is 400 thousandths with what weight on the key.
Right.
If you really wanted it consistent, you have to kind of regulate that, and they don't specify. So there's a little bit of
Has
room
that
to play
changed
around.
over the years from Steinway? Because I read somewhere that the Bs and smaller were slightly shallower than the Ds. That must be incorrect information then.
It probably in practice had to be that way,
Okay.
I'm guessing. Back, if you go back in Steinway production, you have the pianos that are being produced now are incredibly consistent. Some of the most consistent pianos that they've ever produced. And so you go back in history and there weren't always these standards that were set,
Uh-huh.
They were they hadn't necessarily defined, oh, we want this or we want that. The main goal was let's get it working.
Sure.
So it's changed. I heard that Horowitz, I think he traveled around with his piano, right? He'd take his piano around with him, and I think I heard that he would have his key dips, it was set pretty shallow. And essentially then you need to voice the hammer to kind of compensate so you still have the oomph you want. But it was pretty shallow, so I think my understanding is that helps with speed and,
Uh-huh.
well, I know it helps with speed, but
One of my friends is, he will take a lesson from someone who knew Horowitz personally every now and again, and he said Horowitz liked his down weight at 40 grams. So
There you go.
I don't know if that's true. It could be a rumor, but he liked his pianos quite light, from what I understand.
yeah, well, and I've heard that there's a great book by one of the technicians that worked at Steinway, kind of from the early days in their concert department. And he illustrates a few different instances where they changed the hammers and the artist was just not happy because it changed the way. The problem is the hammers wear out, right?
Yeah.
Your tone can get really gross over time, and you can't voice it anymore.
And I'm sure that you can't say, hey, I want 90s hammers,
Yeah,
correct?
no
Yeah.
way. Yeah, I can't get that. And you might have different weighting and things like that. So, you got to be aware that it's unrealistic to say, I'm going to replace my hammers, I want my piano to be exactly the same.
Right. And do you think that affects the tone? Of course it would affect the tone somewhat, but you and I have, and maybe this is bad to put in a Steinway video, but we've also said that we love a lot of the new changes Steinway makes, but some of that rich warmth might be more ideal in some of the older models. What do you think makes that? Do you think it is the source of wood in the soundboard, or do you think it is maybe the hammer material, all of the above, or is there something specific that you could point to? Because a lot of people talk about golden era Steinways from, I don't know what it is, the 20s, 30s, 40s. It seems like a pretty loose term. If someone wants to sell their piano, oh, it's a golden era Steinway.
It seems different for every person I talk to. The golden era is whatever decade their piano was built in. And the Steinway and the salesman let them know.
Yeah.
And I'm not the expert. I'm not the wood technologist, but I think it's a combination of who was doing the bellies, the soundboard, the bridge, because that interplay, how much does the string engage that soundboard? How stiff is the soundboard? That is a big deal. And also the wood speed, the pick of the wood that they're using does make a difference, I understand, but I don't have personal experience, in that field. But I think the hammers are huge though too. They're number two, behind that. And so, I can try and voice hammers differently. Like for instance, I could choose to use lacquer and lacquer thinner, and I could soak it in a little deeper. And that lacquer thinner, it flashes off slower, much slower. It takes, 24 hours plus still, and it's still getting harder after that. So if I do that though, I can get more of that type of sound, I want to say, where it's a nice big body, and warmth, but then you can voice it, but it's strong, so you can voice it to be a little more mellow.
Okay.
So you have a more mellow piano, you can have a more mellow piano, but it still has enough strength and body to kind of carry, and you don't feel like it's too mushy and,
Sure.
But it's interesting, I think the aesthetic trends kind of have changed, with the different decades.
Uh-huh.
And I do feel like things are going a little bit brighter and lighter now.
Yeah.
And I've seen with the different Steinways that I've worked on, some of the old ones, if they have original parts, just the touch and the tone of it. It's like Victorian era, it seemed like they were kind of lighter,
Okay.
brighter, and then, you know, you get into like the 60s and 70s, it seems like they were really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's just pianists kind of responded to what they were producing and learned how to make it work, or the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Sure.
So Steinway does try and, you know, they say they try and make changes based on if the artists want them, right?
Absolutely.
If they're
yeah.
picking the pianos, then must be good, right? So, but I do feel like you get that swing, lighter and lighter versus mellow and heavy, and
Sure. Well, I'm going to let you finish this up, and then we'll come back with the next segment.
okay.